Welcome to In the Workshop. This is all about a Warco lathe, changing the size of one of the change wheels in the drivetrain to slow down the speed of the longitudinal auto traverse. This small lathe is capable of screw cutting, but it doesn't have a gearbox. You have to change the change wheels. The chart on the front of the case shows the different settings for metric and imperial screw cutting. I'm never going to use it for this purpose. I do have a lathe in the workshop with a gearbox, and if I ever did want to screw cut using the lathe, I would use that one. Although I do remember my early attempts at screw cutting were not very successful. At one stage I made a strand of DNA. To be honest, for the size of threads that I use, I can generally use a die in a tailstock die holder. In case you're wondering what I'm doing here, I'm just cleaning the gears before I remove them. That way my hands will not get quite as dirty. The plan is to change this first gear for a smaller one. In this clip I'm briefly showing what happens when you loosen the nuts that hold the change wheels in place. There is a split washer that falls off. I put them in the chip tray so I don't lose them. All I have to do now is remove the nuts to release the change wheels. I almost forgot, you need to move the change wheels out of the way so you can get at them by slackening off an Allen bolt at the bottom. After loosening the Allen bolt, you can move the support frame out of the way. In this clip, I've removed the top change wheel because that is the one I'm going to try and substitute a smaller one for. You can clearly see the oiling arrangement in this clip. The shafts are hollow and you apply oil to the hole in the end. Here's a closer look at one of the split washers. Be very careful not to lose these because they are quite special. Right at the bottom is where the Allen bolt is located that allows you to swing the support frame out of the way. Here I'm testing the gear meshing to see what is acceptable. Originally the nuts were quite tight, so I moved the entire assembly towards the headstock to hold the change wheel steady while I undid the nuts. I did dismantle the entire change wheel assembly, including the bottom one, but I forgot to video that bit. I only did this just to see how the assembly went together. I'm going to substitute the top change wheel for a smaller one. The only trouble is I can't get the small gear out of the change wheel, but I have a plan. What I need is a lathe for this, and here is just one example of why I want this machine in my second workshop. I just pressed out the gear using the tailstock fitted with a socket. I can see that this lathe is going to be very useful to me. That was very easy to do. Now all I have to do is hold a smaller change wheel up against the main lathe chuck, then press the smaller gear into the keyway by simply turning the tailstock hand wheel. Reassembly is the opposite of disassembly. With the split washer in place, I fit the nut and tighten it up. The only problem that I seem to have is that this change wheel arrangement is not on the list of change wheel arrangements. The first gear wheel was not engaging with the headstock gear and it made a horrible rattling noise. I'm going to try and mesh the gear a bit closer to the gear on the headstock spindle. Previously it was a bit of a rattle fit, so maybe by doing this it will be quieter. Well, it's a bit quieter, but it doesn't sound good. This really sounds bad to my ears. I don't think it's worth it to get such a slight reduction in the speed of longitudinal traverse if it's going to sound like this. All the other gears are perfectly in mesh with each other except for this one. If I move this smaller gear any closer to the spindle gear, then it locks up. I did find a gear that was almost the same size as the original, maybe a couple of teeth less, so I decided to fit this instead. After reassembly I tried running the lathe again, but this time it made a very different sound. It was a high-pitched whine. This is not a big problem, it's just that the first gear was too tightly meshed with the one on the headstock spindle. After making a slight adjustment to the position of the gear train, I tried again. Now the gear meshing is perfect and the entire assembly runs very smoothly, even at around 3000 RPM. For now, I think that is going to have to do. I don't intend to do a lot of turning on this lathe anyway, and at least I have a slight reduction in the speed of the longitudinal traverse. It's time, I think, to refit the end cover. This gear train is now incredibly smooth, far smoother than on my other lathes. I think the Myford's quite good, but the Boxford's a bit rattly. Although the Smart & Brown lathe with its gearbox is very quiet indeed. That is partly due though to the fact that when I bought the Smart & Brown lathe there were no change wheels to the gearbox, so instead I fitted a toothed belt drive system, which is very quiet. I really don't think I can get it much better. While I was filming this, my head got in the way, and I couldn't help but notice that I'm going slightly grey. My hair sticks out of my head at all angles, a bit like Albert Einstein, and I never did like that, which is why I grew my hair long in the first place many years ago. Here I am posing for the camera with my daughter Charlotte, showing just a couple of my modest collection of medieval weapons of mass destruction. This photograph was taken by a friend of mine using a special photographic process. And when I said, "How did you get that effect?" he said, "Well, I just pressed the shutter button." Back now to the lathe, showing the turning operation at a slightly reduced traverse speed, which I think will be fine. That's it for this one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists, you can actually watch the videos back to back.